"I'm leaving," I exclaimed. "Good, and don't come back." My wife, Jenna, replied dismissively as she continued flipping through her phone. This wasn't our first fight in the past few months, but this time, something was different. Jenna's verbal attacks and her emotional detachment were getting worse, making me feel more and more isolated in my own home. I left the house, got in my car, and just started driving with no destination in mind. About 15 minutes later, my cell phone rang. It was my best friend, George. "Hey, Kurt, what's going on?" "Jenna told me you left the house," George asked. "Yeah, we had another big fight." "I don't know, man. I'm starting to get to the point of breaking up with her," I admitted. George replied, "Don't worry about it. You know how women are sometimes. Why don't we meet for a beer later and discuss it?" "Thanks, George, but not tonight. I think I just need some alone time to clear my head." We exchanged a few more words before hanging up. I realized I had subconsciously driven to my used car store. Sitting in the empty parking lot, I pondered whether I could continue to live like this, pacing around whenever I was home, never knowing what version of Jenna I would get on any given day. I cared about her, but the toxicity was slowly destroying me. Looking out the windshield at the sunset, I knew in my heart that this was the end. If things didn't change immediately, I would have to leave for good. I just didn't know how I would break the news to my daughter, Carrie. "Daddy, are you and Mom okay?" asked Carrie, her voice full of concern. "I heard you two had another fight." "I'm not going to lie to you, honey. We're not doing well right now," I replied. "But you don't worry. I'll take care of it one way or another." I knew I had to take care of myself first if I wanted to be strong for Carrie. Starting the car engine again, I headed back home where the unknown awaited me. Over the next few weeks, Jenna and I's relationship only got worse. The violent arguments may have stopped, but they were replaced by long periods of cold silence and avoidance. To keep my distance, I found myself sleeping in the guest room more and more often. Jenna would come home late, staying late at work without texting me. One evening I returned and found Carrie home alone. "Mom's not home yet," she told me flatly. "She said she had things to do at work and would be back late." I checked my phone again. Still nothing from Jenna. This was the third night this week she'd been out late for hours without letting us know. As I heated up the leftovers of dinner for Carrie and I, my mind was racing with speculation. Where does Jenna really spend her nights? Could she be having an affair? Maybe that's why she's become so hostile towards me. I tried my best to push those suspicions out of my head for Carrie's sake. But I knew I had to get to the bottom of it one way or another if I had any hope of saving our family. The next morning, I decided to check Jenna's cell phone while she was in the shower. The code listed our wedding anniversary, a date that clearly no longer held much meaning for her. My heart clenched as I looked through her messages. She was indeed having an affair. And to make matters worse, with my best friend George. The evidence was clear. They were planning another secret rendezvous. Crushed and angry, I put the phone away as I heard the shower turn off. I had to meet her face to face. This charade had gone on long enough, no matter how painful the truth was. Our marriage was disintegrating before my eyes. I paced around the living room, working up the courage to face Jenna when she came out of the bedroom. The messages I'd read kept popping into my head, the way they'd talk casually about their affair, like it was no big deal. My best friend and my wife had been betraying me for an unknown amount of time. Jenna walked into the room, avoiding meeting his gaze. "We need to talk," I said firmly. "I know about you and George." Jenna's eyes widened in surprise, and then narrowed in anger. "I don't know what you think you know, but you're being ridiculous as always," she hissed back. I grabbed her phone off the coffee table, quickly unlocked it, and showed her the string of messages between her and George, in which they were planning their next meeting. "Then explain this," I demanded. "Were you going to tell me, or did you just keep sneaking around behind my back?" Jenna snatched up her phone, her expression changing from anger to annoyance. "Okay, you got me. This has been going on for months now. George has been paying more attention to me than you have lately with your long hours at the dealership," she said coldly. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This confirmation of the worst-case scenario threw me off balance. "I can't believe you would do this to our family. And even to George," I said, shaking my head in bewilderment. Save the Wounded Husband Act, Jenna scoffed. This marriage has been over for a long time. I want a divorce. I expected lies, apologies, excuses, but not this. She'd been tested longer than I'd anticipated. All the signs were there, but I refused to notice them. There was no turning back now. If you really feel that way, fine. I'll contact my lawyer on Monday, I said quietly. Jenna turned and walked off into the bedroom without another word, leaving me standing there wondering how a 14-year relationship could have crumbled so suddenly. But one thing I knew for sure, Jenna and George would regret the day they betrayed me. In the weeks following my confrontation with Jenna, I plunged headlong into planning my next steps. I was still reeling from the betrayal, but I was determined to get justice one way or another. I met with a divorce attorney to begin the process. Jenna wasted no time and found a place to live on the other side of town. How cold and callous she was about everything only made me even more angry. During the day, I was busy working at the dealership, but at night I sequestered myself in my home office to dig up everything I could find about George's past and finances. If I'm going down, so is he. After a few late-night digs on the internet, the pieces began to come together. George had a dark history that he carefully hid: assault arrests, tax evasion, and ties to organized crime in his hometown. I decided that money and revenge went hand in hand. I started referring customers to him for expensive transmission work and engine repairs. I made them pay me up front in cash, keeping a percentage for myself and handing the rest to George under the table. Soon I was siphoning off nearly $15,000 from George's garage business, and he didn't even suspect a thing. But I was just warming up. One Saturday, I invited George over to my place under the pretense of clearing things up. "No hard feelings about the whole thing, huh?" said George casually, uncorking a beer. "I know you and Jenna have been having problems for a long time." I smiled, trying my best to hide my rage. "Yeah, I'm cool with it," I lied. "What's a little fling between friends?" "If you only knew what I had planned for you," I thought with grim satisfaction. "For now, I'll continue to play nice. But soon, you'll get what you deserve." Over the next few months, I continued to drag George into more and more cases while plotting my revenge. Phase 1 had drained him financially. The second phase was to completely ruin his life. I discovered George's connections to some very dangerous people in his hometown, a notorious crime boss named Vincent, who had a reputation for breaking kneecaps and worse when he was crossed. I made some inquiries through a friend of a friend of a friend to get Vincent's number. I told him that I had a business proposition for him that would be worth coming to town to discuss in person. Intrigued, he agreed to meet. When we met in a dark corner booth in a rundown bar, I got straight to the point. "Let's say I have an enemy I want to end forever, and there's no way he can come back to me. Would $25,000 be enough to motivate you and your team?" I asked. Vincent smiled slowly. "With the right target, I think we can work something out. My guys like to take a trip every now and then," he said. "What exactly did this guy do to mess with you so badly?" "He's sleeping with my wife," I replied coldly. Vincent let out a low whistle. "Say no more, friend. We'll deal with this gentleman without further question." We shook hands as we settled the details. The trap had been set now. All that was left was to get George to the perfect place. The third step was to turn his betrayal into a death sentence. It was time for him to pay the ultimate price. I'll be watching with a smile on my face. Finally, the day had come. Everything was ready for George to get what he was supposed to get. I lured George to a secluded warehouse I owned on the pretense that I wanted to ask his advice about storing some cars there. He always liked to give his opinion, even when I didn't ask for it. He had no idea what awaited him inside. "Kurt, what the hell is the secrecy about coming here?" asked George as we walked through the empty warehouse. "Are you completely out of your mind because Jenna dumped you?" I laughed forcedly. "Something like that. But you're in for a little surprise." At that moment, Vincent and two of his minions appeared out of the shadows. The color disappeared from George's face. "Kurt, what the hell is that?" he exclaimed. "Who are these guys?" "They're here to do justice," I answered coldly. "To make you pay for stabbing me in the back with Jenna." Panic seized George, and he began to plead ineffectually. But it was impossible to persuade him. I watched with grim satisfaction as the men taunted George with savage precision. I left before the last blows were struck, not wishing to have blood on my hands. But I found out later that the deed was done. That was all I needed. Thanks to Vincent's assurances, the money and loose ends were easily sorted out. As for the town, George simply quit his business and left unexpectedly. In time, his disappearance faded from memory. But I'll never forget the look on his face when my trap was finally sprung. Justice can be ugly, but in this case, it was served as a cold dish.